Blind Justice presents a hero and a city with secrets hidden by the cloak of night. What's Done in the Dark, the audio drama.
Dominic leaned back. His chair creaked slightly. The sounds of the city drifted in through the open window. It was a brief moment of peace in a city on the brink. Daniel sat at the table in his wheelchair, cards spread out before him. He was a man who found comfort in patterns, in the predictability of numbers. It was a stark contrast to their lives.
Queen of Spades.
Daniel muttered, more to himself than to Dominic. "You're going to wear out that deck," Dominic said, a faint smile in his voice.
A man's gotta have his routines.
Daniel chuckled. The television flickered in the corner. It was tuned to the news, a constant backdrop of chaos and corruption that had become the norm in Ravenhurst. The anchor's voice was a dull drone, reciting the day's grim headlines. Mayor Rashad to hold press conference later today, the anchor droned, addressing concerns over the recent spike in crime. Dominic Rashad. Dominic's face hardened. The name left a bitter taste in his mouth. He was the very embodiment of the rot that was eating away at Ravenhurst. A wolf in sheep's clothing, a predator hiding behind a carefully constructed facade of charisma and concern. Another dog and pony show.
They all are.
Daniel grunted in agreement. He shuffled the cards, his gaze fixed on the swirling patterns. The anchor's voice continued, oblivious to their cynicism. Unrest continues to grow in the wake of the recent factory explosion. Dominic's hand instinctively went to the burn scar on his face, a constant reminder of the tragedy that had taken his sight and plunged him into the heart of Ravenhurst's darkness. A sharp buzz from Dominic's phone cut through the tension. He reached out, his hand guided by instinct, and retrieved the device. "It's Ruth," he said, his voice tight. Ruth, his friend, a young woman who he had vowed to protect, but more importantly, the woman who had become his inspiration behind wanting to reignite the movement. The mother who was fighting for her two daughters, while he was out seeking answers.
Everything all right?
Daniel asked, his voice laced with concern. Dominic listened intently, his face etched with worry. Ruth's voice, usually calm and steady, was laced with anxiety. It spoke of threats, of men lurking in the shadows, of fear for Rosita and her daughters. A heavy knock on the door echoed through the apartment. It was abrupt, insistent, menacing. The hairs on the back of Dominic's neck stood on end. Nugget, Dominic's loyal canine companion, growled low in his throat. He was a formidable beast, a mixture of German shepherd and something wilder, his senses attuned to his master's. He rose from his spot by the window, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Stay," Dominic commanded, his voice firm. Daniel, ever cautious, began to roll in his wheelchair. He moved with the grace of a seasoned fighter, his hand hovering near the concealed weapon at his hip.
Who is it?
He called out, his voice wary. Silence. Then a voice, low and gruff, responded from the other side.
"I need to speak with Dominic."
Daniel's hand tightened on his weapon. He exchanged a tense look with Dominic. "Who's asking?"
"An old friend," the voice replied. The words were laced with irony, or maybe it was regret.
Dominic's gut churned. He knew that voice, and he knew it couldn't mean anything good.
"Daniel, let him in," Dominic said, his voice heavy with resignation.
Daniel hesitated. His eyes narrowed. He knew the voice too. And like Dominic, he didn't trust it. But he also knew better than to question Dominic's instincts. He unholstered his gun, keeping it trained on the door as he unlocked it. The door swung open. Standing in the hallway, his face partially obscured by the shadows, was Andre. His eyes, cold and calculating, met Dominic's unseeing gaze. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Daniel stood guard, his gun still drawn, his eyes darting between Andre and Dominic.
"You have a lot of nerve showing your face here," Daniel growled, his voice laced with venom.
Andre ignored him, his gaze fixed on Dominic.
"We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent.
Dominic gestured to the chair opposite him.
"Talk."
Andre stepped inside, his movements cautious, as if he were walking into a lion's den. He sat down, his eyes never leaving Dominic.
"I know I have no right to ask anything of you, not after what I did, not after what I let happen."
His voice was laced with shame, with the weight of past betrayals. He spoke of his regrets, of the choices he had made, of the lines he had crossed in the name of loyalty. He spoke of the monster he had helped create. "Rashad," Andre said, his voice barely a whisper. "He's the one behind it all. The factory explosion, the drugs flooding the streets, the corruption that's eating away at this city. He's the serpent's head, Dominic, and I helped him." Dominic listened, his face impassive. He could feel the weight of Andre's words, the sincerity in his voice. But after all this time, after all the betrayals, could he afford to believe him?
Why come to us? Why turn on your own?"
Andre's gaze shifted to Daniel, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Because it's gone too far. What started as a means to an end, it's become a monster. Rashad, he's lost control. He's going to destroy this city. He has to be stopped." Daniel snorted. "And you think we're going to help you clean up your mess?" Bitterness dripped from his words. The memory of their last encounter, of Andre's betrayal, was still fresh in his mind. The scars, both physical and emotional, ran deep. Andre flinched as if struck. He looked at Dominic, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm asking for your help, Dominic, for the sake of this city, for the sake of everything we fought for." Dominic sat in silence, his mind racing. He could feel Andre's sincerity, the desperation radiating from him. But trust, once broken, is a fragile thing. And in their line of work, trust could be the difference between life and death.
"Why should we trust you? How do we know this isn't another one of your games?"
Dominic took a deep breath, the air heavy with the weight of the decision he had to make. He reached out, his hands connecting with the temples on the sides of Andre's head. His fingers brushed against his dreadlocks, his fingers shaking, with the faint tremors that betrayed the other man's fear. And in that moment, Dominic knew. He could sense the truth in Andre's mind, the fear that mirrored his own. "He's telling the truth," Dominic said, his voice firm.
"What? How can you be sure?"
"I just know," Dominic replied, his sightless eyes boring into Andre's. He could sense Daniel's skepticism, his distrust. But right now they couldn't afford to be divided. They needed to present a united front if they were going to have any chance against Rashad. "We'll need help," Dominic stated, his voice devoid of emotion. He knew they were outmatched, outgunned. They needed more than just the three of them if they were going to take down Rashad and his corrupt network. "I can reach out to some people," Andre offered, his voice hesitant. "People who owe me favors. People who are tired of living under Rashad's thumb." Dominic nodded. "Do it. But be careful who you trust. Rashad's reach is long, and his grip on this city is strong." The air crackled with a new kind of tension. The tension of anticipation, of a brewing storm. They were on the precipice of a war for the soul of Ravenhurst. And Dominic, the blind vigilante, was ready to lead the charge.